Growing up in our modest two-story house, I always felt from a young age that my place in this world was mapped out with clear, sharp lines. These lines ran through our rooms, dividing responsibilities, attention, and care, as though Lisa and I were characters in some kind of unequal script. My sister was always the center of the stage, while I stood on the periphery, playing a role that wasn't the lead but was critically important. I remember the first time I felt this divide. I was just 6 years old. Lisa had just been born, and everything in the house seemed to freeze in a state of anxious anticipation. It was as if even the walls were listening to her breathing, adjusting themselves to its rhythm. Mom would yell from the kitchen, "Sarah, close that window right now." And I would rush to obey because I knew that any hesitation could trigger another wave of panic. "Your sister might catch a cold," she would add. Those words became the anthem of my childhood. Over time, I came to understand that Lisa's fragile health wasn't just a circumstance, it was a set of rules that govern our family's entire existence. When I turned 12 and Lisa started elementary school, an incident occurred that stayed with me for years. She came home with a runny nose, a minor, ordinary thing for a child her age. But my parents' reaction was so dramatic that I couldn't help but feel guilty. My father, with a grim expression, declared, "This is your fault, Sarah. You must have left the door open this morning." His words cut through me like a knife. I knew it wasn't true, but I also knew arguing would be pointless. Accepting the blame, I spent the weekend at home, clutching my resentment tightly. Gradually, my life turned into a series of responsibilities piled onto my shoulders. While other kids my age played outside or traded cartoon character cards, I vacuumed carpets and dusted shelves. "Mom, why doesn't Lisa help?" I asked one day, standing by the ironing board. Mom didn't even turn to face me. "Your sister has a weak immune system. The doctors say she can't overexert herself. Besides, you're so good at this." Her voice carried not a hint of doubt about the fairness of her words. This pattern repeated over and over again. If Lisa got a bad grade in math, it was my fault. I should have helped her study. If Mom's favorite mug got broken, somehow that was also on me, even if I'd been in another room. But one particular incident burned itself into my memory. I was 16, and Lisa was 10. She had taken my favorite sweater without asking, despite my explicit requests not to, and managed to spill orange juice on it. Furious, I complained to Mom, hoping for at least a sliver of understanding. But she just sighed wearily. "Sarah, you should have put it somewhere she couldn't reach. You know how careless she is." In that moment, a strange, muted desire to escape began to grow within me. It grew like a crack in glass, becoming more noticeable with each passing day. I threw myself into my studies, doing everything I could to achieve perfect grades. School became my refuge, a place where I could prove to myself that I was capable of more. Teachers praised me for my diligence, but even these successes brought no joy at home. Instead of praise, I heard from Mom, "Look how easily this comes to Sarah. Lisa, you need to try harder." Every morning, I left for school, hoping that another A or another recognition of my efforts would bring me one step closer to freedom. But even in those dreams, Lisa remained a shadow that inevitably followed me. My new life felt like a breath of fresh air after years spent in a stuffy room. Every day, I woke up in my small but cozy apartment, savoring the quiet and the feeling of independence. My job at Anderson and Global was thrilling: projects, meetings, late-night work on presentations. I was immersed in the rhythm of a big city, feeling like part of something much larger than I had ever imagined in my teenage years. No one hovered over me anymore, no one yelled or blamed me. It was strange, almost foreign, but utterly delightful. My calls home became a kind of ritual. Every Sunday, I called Mom and listened to her updates about life back home. Lisa, as always, remained the center of attention. "She's trying to find herself," Mom would say, her voice filled with the same notes of care and justification. According to her, Lisa was exploring different paths: photography courses, interior design, even cooking. But nothing held her attention for more than a few weeks. It sounded like the continuation of the same old script, but I no longer felt the sharp sting of injustice that had haunted me as a child. Instead, I felt a mild detachment, as though I were observing the whole story from afar. Still, I couldn't completely detach myself. One day, a few months into my new life, Mom called me first, a rare occurrence. Her voice was tense, and I immediately felt on edge. "Sarah, we have a problem," she began, skipping the usual formalities. Lisa ran away." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean she ran away?" I asked, not immediately grasping the meaning of her words. "We had a fight," Mom explained. "She said she was tired of living by our rules. She packed her things and left. We haven't been able to reach her for 2 days." I was stunned. Lisa had always been the center of attention, surrounded by care and protection. In my mind, she couldn't just up and disappear. It went against everything I knew about her. "Have you tried contacting her friends?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Yes, but no one knows where she is." "Sarah, please, you have to help." "She could be anywhere," Mom's voice trembled. "We can't manage without you." Those words transported me back to the past, to that reality where everything rested on my shoulders. But I was no longer that Sarah. I had learned to say no, to set boundaries, or at least, I thought I had. "Okay, I'll try to find out something," I replied, feeling a familiar sense of uncertainty flare up inside me. The next day, I took a day off and drove to my hometown. On the way, I tried to piece the situation together in my mind, but no answers came. Images of Lisa flashed through my thoughts, but instead of real memories, they were only echoes of her childhood tantrums and carefree smile. Who is she now? What kind of life does she want? At home, I was greeted by Mom with swollen eyes. Dad sat in the corner of the room, buried in a newspaper, but the furrowed expression on his face made it clear he simply didn't know how to express his feelings. I glanced around, expecting to see traces of Lisa's presence, her favorite blanket on the couch, scattered books, or a cup with the remnants of hot cocoa. But the house felt empty, as if her absence had erased part of its essence. We spent the evening discussing everything we knew. It turned out that Lisa had withdrawn a small amount of money from the joint account, packed a few things, and just left. None of the neighbors had seen her, and even Grandma, who was always up to date on family matters, didn't know anything specific. This only deepened the sense of unease. The next day, I decided to start looking for Lisa myself. My search led me to her favorite places: the cafe where she often spent time, the city park where we used to walk as kids, and even the library, though I knew she didn't like to read. I spoke with people she might know, but no one had seen her in the past few days. My anxiety grew with every passing hour. By evening, I was sitting in my car, parked outside a small cafe, feeling the weight of exhaustion and helplessness pressing down on me. Inside, I noticed a familiar silhouette. It was Lisa. She was sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee, staring out the window. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped out of the car and walked into the cafe. "Lisa," I said softly as I approached her table. She looked up, and her face reflected a mix of surprise and irritation. "What are you doing here, Sarah?" she asked, skipping any kind of greeting. I sat down across from her, studying my sister. She looked tired, but there was something new in her eyes: determination. "We're worried. You should have told us where you were going." "You wouldn't understand," she replied dismissively, turning her attention back to her coffee. But I did understand. In that moment, I realized that Lisa had finally tried to break free from the same cycle I had once left behind. After that phone conversation, I sat in my quiet apartment for a long time, reflecting on everything I had heard. Raindrops tapped against the window as if accompanying my thoughts. It was one of those moments when the past comes knocking on the door of your life, demanding attention. Mom's words echoed in my mind. After everything we've done for you. She hadn't said it accusingly, but I knew those words carried the weight of my childhood, which was once again making its presence felt. I remembered our house, 2 stories, a bit run down, but once so cozy. I knew it needed repairs. I'd seen it during my last visit. Memories blended with reality, and I pictured the scene, Lisa still sprawled on the couch with her phone in hand, Mom bustling in the kitchen, and Dad, once so strong, now looking tired and worn out. Their world had hardly changed, while mine had moved far ahead. But hadn't I been part of that world? Hadn't I been the person who promised to support my family? My principles and ambitions suddenly clashed with the loyalty I still felt toward them, even after years of independent living. The next day, I went to the office, but my thoughts refused to form a coherent picture. My work, my future, my dream of owning my own apartment, all of it suddenly felt fragile. I didn't even realize how I spent half the day just skimming through documents without truly processing them. My colleagues began asking if I was okay, but I only nodded, trying to hide the inner conflict. That evening, I called Mom. Her voice trembled with relief when she heard me. "Sarah, dear, I knew you wouldn't abandon us," she said, and I felt something inside me tighten at those words. "I'll try to help," I replied, barely suppressing a sigh. "But I need time to think everything through." After that conversation, I began crunching the numbers. My salary allowed me to help them, but it would mean putting off my dream of owning my own apartment indefinitely. On the other hand, I couldn't ignore their requests. After all, they had given me the foundation that allowed me to break free from the cycle, and I knew my turn to give back had come. I started sending them money for small repairs. These were modest amounts that I could afford without sacrificing my basic needs. Mom called every week, updating me on how the roof had been fixed or how the plumber had replaced the pipes. "You can't imagine how much you're helping us," she would say. But I could imagine. I saw their house as a symbol of my childhood, which was now slowly coming back to life with my help. Lisa, however, remained unchanged. She still wasn't working, studying, or making any plans for the future. Her indifference irritated me more than I was willing to admit. One day, while talking to Mom, I decided to ask the question. "And what about Lisa? Does she help with anything at all?" Mom was silent for a moment, and then I heard her sigh. "Sarah, you know Lisa has always had a hard time." It hit me like a punch. I realized nothing had changed. All these years, they had continued shielding her from life itself, excusing her inaction. I listened to Mom but stopped trying to argue. These conversations only left me feeling drained. Soon, I began to notice how my own plans were growing increasingly out of reach. The money I had been saving for a down payment on an apartment was instead going toward repairs on my parents' house. When I realized my savings were nearly depleted, a wave of bitterness washed over me. I sat in the kitchen of my apartment, holding a financial statement, and understood that my dream had been postponed indefinitely. But that wasn't what troubled me most. What gnawed at me was the thought that I couldn't change the situation. No matter how hard I tried, my help didn't motivate Lisa. On the contrary, she seemed to grow used to the fact that I would always sort everything out. Her carefree attitude felt to me like not just a result of how she was raised but something that had become ingrained in her nature. I felt like that little girl again, the one who used to try to please everyone and take the blame for others' mistakes. Now I was an adult, yet I still couldn't shed that role. Only this time, I wasn't 16. Now I was over 30, and I knew this couldn't go on. The decision came to me suddenly. It wasn't a rebellion or a protest. Rather, it was an act of self-preservation. I realized that if I didn't set boundaries now, I would never be able to live my own life. The next morning, I wrote a message to Mom. I won't be able to help as much as I used to. I need to think about myself. I hope you understand. I reread the text over and over before pressing send. My heart was pounding, but deep down, I knew this was the right step. I froze, holding my phone, while Mom's voice on the other end sounded casual, as if everything was fine. But inside, I was boiling. I sat at my desk at work, surrounded by documents and laptops, trying to process the surge of emotions. How could she have spent so much on a dress? The tension inside me grew, mixed with a sense of betrayal, and I didn't know what was more upsetting, the fact of the purchase or that it had been done behind my back. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you understand that this dress costs more than I spend on rent in a month? I was helping you so you could repair the house, cover bills. And this is just a luxury. She was silent, and I could hear only her breathing. Then her voice returned, softer now, almost apologetic. Sarah, sweetheart, I know it seems irresponsible. But the dress was just so beautiful, and I thought I deserved a little joy. After everything we'd been through, it felt like, she hesitated, as if searching for the right words. It won't happen again, I promise. I was silent, struggling to find words that wouldn't escalate into shouting. I thought about all those days I had scrimped and saved for my own apartment, skipping coffee at cafes, turning down nights out with friends, all to secure my future. And now I looked at the numbers in my bank account and realized that it had all gone toward a dress that might be worn only once. Mom, I want to believe this was an exception, I finally said, feeling my fingers tremble. But I want you to know, I can't afford these kinds of expenses. I helped you because I thought it was genuinely necessary. But if the money is being spent on unnecessary things, I'll have to reconsider this arrangement. Sarah, dear, Mom started again, her voice pleading. You won't abandon us, will you? It was just a mistake. I understand, I was wrong. But please, don't take away your support. We truly need you. Those words pierced me like a knife. It felt like everything was returning to the past, where every decision I made was accompanied by guilt, where I was constantly reminded of my duty to the family. But I wasn't that girl anymore, the one who silently accepted everything placed on her shoulders. I was a grown woman who deserved the right to live her own life. Fine, Mom, I said after a long pause. But this is your last warning. If I see anything like this again, I'll have to stop providing financial support. And that's not up for discussion. She reassured me again that everything would be fine, that it was a one-time incident. I hung up the phone and felt a heaviness settle in my chest. Thoughts swirled in my head. Had I done the right thing? Was I being too harsh? But at the same time, I knew I had to set boundaries. If I didn't do it now, I would never break free from this endless cycle of demands. The next few weeks felt like walking on eggshells. Every time I opened my banking app, I anxiously checked the transactions. It felt like I was waiting for the next blow. But everything was quiet. The purchases were limited to the usual expenses, groceries, utility bills. Mom even sent me a couple of messages thanking me for my help, which was highly unusual. However, the calm was deceptive. One evening, as I was heading home after a long day at work, my phone rang. It was Lisa. Her name lit up on the screen, and I froze in place before answering. Hi, Sarah. Her voice was slightly hesitant, as if she didn't know how to start. I wanted to talk to you. I'm listening, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Did you know that Mom is still, well, making her little purchases? She paused, as though waiting for my reaction. What are you talking about, Lisa? I asked, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I saw her the other day. She bought some expensive jewelry and, well, I think she's hiding it from you. I thought you should know. The world seemed to tilt. Anger surged through me, but even more so, disappointment. Lisa, who rarely took responsibility for anything, had suddenly become the bearer of this uncomfortable truth. "Thank you for telling me," I replied, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice. "I'll handle it." As I hung up, a volcano of emotions erupted inside me. All my efforts, all my sacrifices, and this was the result. I knew that the conversation with Mom would be one of the hardest I'd ever have. I stared at my laptop screen, its glow burning in my eyes. The lines of expenses felt like drops of water forming into something greater, a story I couldn't ignore. The house, which supposedly needed urgent repairs, was not the focus of these expenses. The money was being spent on indulgences, luxuries, things that had nothing to do with helping the family. But the most troubling part was that this image of a consumer didn't align with my mother. Electronic payments for smartphones, nightclub bills, designer items. All of it screamed to me that the money was going somewhere it wasn't meant to. And the only logical answer to the question of, where was Lisa? She was the thread that could tie it all together. Who else could have accessed the account under Mom's name? The next day, I called her. "Lisa, we need to talk," I said, striving to keep my voice steady. "About what?" she asked, her voice sounding innocent, but I knew there was something more beneath it. "I'd like to meet in person." "It's important," I said, not giving her a chance to evade. She tried to object, but I insisted. In the end, we agreed to meet at a local cafe, and I even flew in for the weekend just for this. When I walked in, she was already seated by the window, casually scrolling through something on a new smartphone. A smartphone I suspected had been bought with my money. Her hair was perfectly styled, her nails neatly polished, and her clothes looked like they belonged in a fashion magazine. She noticed me and waved, smiling, but her eyes narrowed slightly, perhaps sensing this would be a difficult conversation. "Hi, Sarah," she stood up to hug me, but I held back the warmth that had once been in my gestures. Instead, I nodded and sat across from her. "Lisa, I want to talk about the money you've been spending," I began directly, deciding there was no point in dancing around the issue. Her smile faded. "Money? What money?" she asked, feigning confusion. "The money that's been withdrawn from my account," I continued, locking eyes with her. "The money you've been spending on nightclubs, designer clothes, and all these indulgences that clearly have nothing to do with house repairs." She stiffened, her gaze darting between my face and the coffee cup she nervously picked up. "It wasn't me," she started, but her voice faltered. "Mom asked me to make some purchases, and maybe I overdid it a little." "A little?" I interrupted, feeling the anger rising within me. "Lisa, you're spending more than I earn in a month. You don't even work. Do you understand that your actions are not only draining my savings but also betraying my trust? You've never understood what it's like to be me," she suddenly exploded, slamming her coffee cup on the table, causing the liquid to spill across its surface. "You were always perfect, always successful, always loved by everyone. And me? I was just the problem. So yes, I allowed myself a little joy. You're always going on about how much you earn anyway." Her words hit me, but not in the way she might have hoped. It wasn't a sting of envy or judgment, but rather confirmation of how deeply rooted her old grudges and jealousy were. Yet, that didn't excuse her actions. "You could have just talked to me, Lisa," I said, trying not to raise my voice. "You could have told me you were struggling, that you needed help finding a job or sorting things out. But instead, you decided to take what didn't belong to you and hide it behind my back." She lowered her head, as if my words were making her think for the first time. "I don't know how to fix this," she said quietly. "For starters, you need to come clean with Mom," I said. "This isn't just about the money, Lisa. It's about honesty. You need to take responsibility for what you've done." We sat in silence. Lisa looked defeated, while I felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. The next day, I went to my parents' house, knowing another difficult conversation awaited me. That day felt like the end of something big, perhaps the very idea that my family would ever change. But deep down, I already felt ready to defend my boundaries, no matter how they would take it. Sitting in front of my laptop screen, a storm of emotions welled up inside me. Anger, frustration, hurt, they all merged into a powerful wave that threatened to overwhelm me. I stared at photos of Lisa, each one feeling like a slap in the face. She stood against the backdrop of luxurious interiors, her carefree smile a stark contrast to the reality I knew. She posed in dresses I could never dream of affording, even in my most daring fantasies. She looked happy, free, and, most painfully, completely indifferent to the cost of that happiness. I closed the laptop, unable to look at it any longer. All my savings, all my hard work, all my sacrifices, it had all gone to fund her extravagant lifestyle. She hadn't even tried to hide it, hadn't considered that it might hurt me. Lisa lived as if it was all her birthright and I was her eternal sponsor, meant to accept it without question. But I couldn't accept it anymore. My next call was to Lisa. She answered on the second ring, her voice sounding cheerful, as if she were genuinely happy to hear from me. "Hey, sis. How's it going?" she said with a lightness that, in that moment, felt unbearable. "Lisa," I began, forcing my voice to stay calm, "we need to have a serious talk." She fell silent, sensing the tension in my tone. "About what?" she asked cautiously. "About how you've been spending my money," I said bluntly, giving her no room to maneuver. Silence hung on the other end of the line. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally said, but her voice wavered. "About the dresses, the vacations, the parties, the new phones, and the jewelry," I said, my words growing sharper with each sentence. "About the photos you proudly post on social media. All those things were bought with my money, Lisa. Money that I earned working long hours. Money I've been saving to build my own life. And you didn't even stop to think that it might be wrong." "Sarah, she began, but I cut her off. "No, Lisa. Enough with the excuses. I'm tired of your games. You don't work, you don't even try to find your own path, as you like to call it. You just live off others and don't feel the slightest bit of shame." "That's not true," she blurted out, but her voice was weaker now. "I just wanted a little happiness, a little joy." "At my expense?" I asked, barely managing to keep my composure. "Your happiness has cost me everything I've been working toward. You didn't even bother to ask me, didn't try to explain. You just took what you wanted as if I owed it to you." "We're family," she said, her voice tinged with hurt. "You've always helped us." "I helped because I believed it was for Mom and Dad, for their well-being. But now I see it was all a lie. You lied to me, Lisa. And I won't tolerate it any longer." She didn't respond. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Starting today, your access to my account is closed," I said firmly. "I'm no longer going to fund your whims. If you want something, start by taking responsibility for your own life." "Sarah, wait," she began, but I had already made up my mind. "No, Lisa. No more, wait. You're a grown woman. Find a job, like everyone else does." I paused, feeling a wave of relief rising within me. "And one more thing, don't ever ask me for money again." I hung up, feeling the tension in my body slowly begin to ease. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had taken back control of my life. The next day, I called my mom. Her voice sounded tired, but I was no longer willing to fall for her manipulations. I explained what had happened and told her I wouldn't be sending any more money for their so-called repairs. But Sarah, how are we supposed to? She began, but I cut her off. You're adults, Mom. I helped because I believed it was necessary. But I'm not going to fund Lisa's lifestyle anymore. If you want her to become responsible, stop shielding her. Mom tried to say something, but her words were drowned out by the finality of my decision. When I hung up, it felt as though a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. It wasn't just a conversation, it was an act of liberation, a reclaiming of control over my own life. I knew it wouldn't be easy moving forward, but I was ready. As I placed the phone down, the silence in the room was deafening. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. The entire conversation, filled with accusations and veiled threats, had finally severed the fragile thread connecting me to my family. Everything they had said, everything they demanded, no longer mattered. I sat in my apartment, staring at the gray wall in front of me, trying to process, was this truly the end? And if it was, why did I feel not just bitterness, but also a strange sense of relief? The silence was broken when my phone began to ring again. I glanced at the screen. Mom. I sighed and pressed decline. Then another call, from Lisa. Decline. The phone rang again and again, but I couldn't let them intrude on my life anymore. I stood up, pacing the room with my arms crossed tightly over my chest, as if trying to shield myself from the icy wave that had crashed over me. Inside, my emotions churned, hurt, anger, disappointment. But at their core was something new, resolve. A determination to protect myself, my boundaries, and my life. The next day, I woke up with a clear plan. First, I called the bank and completely blocked access to my account. All linked cards were canceled. I reviewed every financial document and made sure that control was firmly back in my hands. Next, I contacted the HR department at Carlton Industries and received confirmation that Lisa's application had been rejected. The company's representatives thanked me for the timely warning and assured me that neither my name nor my reputation had been affected. It was a small victory, but an important one for me. After that, I sat down at my laptop and wrote a long message to my Aunt Marie. I thanked her for her honesty and support. At the end, I added, "If you or Jenny ever find yourselves in a similar situation, please let me know. I'm willing to help, but only if it's truly needed." It wasn't just a statement, it was a step toward rebuilding my trust in a world that had seemed to betray me for so long. Weeks passed before I felt ready to revisit the situation with a clear mind. My parents and Lisa hadn't tried to contact me again, and that silence, as painful as it was, became the most welcome sound. I began to think about my life differently. For the first time in years, I felt like my decisions were mine alone. At work, I threw myself into projects. My colleagues noticed my increased productivity, and one day, my manager approached me to offer the lead on a new, larger project. I accepted without hesitation. But what mattered most was that I began to dream about my future again. I resumed planning for the purchase of my apartment, restarted my savings, and, surprisingly, my budget became far more stable without the constant financial drain to my family. It was yet another sign that I had made the right choice. One evening, while heading home, I glanced at my phone and noticed a message from Lisa. It was short and written without her usual casual tone. "Sarah, I know I messed up. I'm sorry." I stared at the screen for a long time, debating how to respond. Two emotions battled within me, the desire to forgive her and the fear of being drawn back into the endless cycle of manipulation. In the end, I chose not to reply. Not because I didn't want to forgive her, but because I knew words wouldn't change anything. She needed to take the first real step forward, not just wait for me to extend a hand. Months went by. My life settled into a steady rhythm, and I began to notice how my anger gradually gave way to a sense of calm. Sometimes I thought about my parents and wondered how they were doing after our last conversation. I understood they probably felt hurt, but that was no longer my concern. I had done everything I could, and I wasn't going back to old patterns. One evening, as I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, I realized I felt free. The freedom I had dreamed of as a teenager, studying hard for exams in the hope of escaping home. And while the journey had been far more difficult than I could have ever imagined, I had finally achieved it. My life was now firmly in my own hands. As the months went by, my world began to fill with new colors. I had almost grown accustomed to the fact that my phone no longer buzzed with endless calls and messages demanding something from me. Now, the notifications were from friends, dinner invitations, or suggestions to go for a walk in the park. It was a different reality, free from the toxicity that had once seemed inevitable. Every morning began with a lightness I had never known before. I sipped my coffee, leisurely read the news, or simply gazed out the window, enjoying the view of a city I was starting to see in a completely different way. It was my city now, not a place I had fled to escape the past, but a place where I was building my future. Work had also become more than just a way to earn money, it was something greater. I felt like part of something meaningful, and my efforts were paying off. Management acknowledged my contributions to a recent project, and I was offered the opportunity to lead a new initiative. It meant more responsibility, more challenges, but I was ready to take them on. It was my chance to prove to myself that I deserved this success. Still, despite all these changes, old memories sometimes crept back. In evenings, when I was alone, I would catch myself thinking about my family. I wondered how Mom was doing. Was Dad okay? And Lisa, was she still living the same way, or had something changed? These questions surfaced in my mind, but I tried not to dwell on them. I knew that those thoughts would only rob me of my peace. One quiet evening, during one of these reflective moments, my phone vibrated. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, unsure whether to answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" I said, trying to sound calm. "Sarah?" "It's Lisa." Her voice was unusually quiet, missing the self-assurance that always tinged her words. I didn't know what to say. For a few seconds, we both remained silent until she spoke again. "I know I don't have the right to call you, but I need to talk." I took a deep breath. There was something new in her voice, something elusive. Was it exhaustion? Regret? I couldn't tell. "All right," I said, deciding to give her a chance. We agreed to meet at a cafe around the corner. I arrived early and sat by the window, watching people rush by. When Lisa walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked different, tired, worn out. Her eyes were puffy, and her hair was tied back in a messy bun, which was so unlike her. "Thank you for coming," she said as she sat down across from me. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the cup of tea she'd ordered. "What did you want to talk about?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Lisa sat quietly for a long time, as if gathering her courage. "You were right," she finally said. "About everything. I ruined it all. I thought I could live like this forever, that I didn't need to try because someone would always save me. You, Mom, Dad," she stopped, lowering her gaze. "But that's not how it works." Everything fell apart. I looked at her, unsure what to say. Part of me was still angry about all the years I had spent trying to pull her out of the pit she had dug for herself. But another part of me saw a person in front of me who, perhaps for the first time, truly understood the weight of her mistakes. "What happened?" I asked, setting aside my emotions for the moment. She told me everything. About how, after our falling out, our parents had tried to help her, but they no longer had the money. About how she had tried to get a job but didn't have the experience or education. About how she had sunk into debt trying to maintain her old lifestyle. And about how all of it had led to complete collapse. I'm not calling to ask for money, she said at the end. I didn't know who else to turn to. I know you don't care about me anymore, but I want to change. I really do. Her words sounded sincere, but I wasn't sure if I could trust her again. It was all so sudden, so unlike her. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to decide what to say. Lisa, I began finally, I'm glad you've decided to take control of your life. But you need to understand that I can't be your savior again. This has to be your journey, your work. If you're serious about starting over, I can offer advice and moral support. But that's all. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. That's all I need. Thank you, Sarah. When she left, I stayed at the table, feeling a strange mix of relief and unease. I didn't know what the future held, but I did know one thing: I wouldn't let anyone use me again. This was my new path, and I was determined to follow it to the end.